Welcome back to another video. Today we're looking at the art of full panel instrument flying on the G1000. So if you're training for an EASA or a UK instrument rating, or if you're simply looking to get to grips with the basics of instrument flying, then this is the video for you. If you're new to the G1000 or to instrument flying in general, then don't worry, we're going to start with the absolute basics and we'll gradually build up to more and more advanced maneuvers as we go. In this first video, we'll cover the essential instrument scans for straight and level flight, climbs, descents, and rate 1 turns. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to drop them in the comments below and we'll be here to help you out. We've got a whole series of EASA and UK instrument rating videos coming up, so if you want to know when we release any new content, hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and you'll never miss out on an update from us. Alright, let's jump into the cockpit, power up the G1000, and get started with full panel instrument flying.
The instruments are split up into two categories. That's the control instruments and the performance instruments. The control instruments include the attitude, the slip indicator, and the power instruments, which in this case is indicated by the load, but in other aircraft the power might be indicated by the manifold pressure and the RPM. Whenever we're going to set the aircraft up in a given phase of flight, we first set the control instruments, and then the performance instruments are used to confirm that the aircraft is performing the way you want it to. The performance instruments include the altimeter, the airspeed indicator, the horizontal situation indicator, which on the G1000 also includes the rated turn indicator, and the vertical speed indicator. Let's look at straight and level as an example. We'll set the aircraft up in straight and level flight, first by setting the control instruments. Starting with the power, we'll set the load to 70%, and then with the attitude, we'll select the straight and level attitude. Now that we've set the aircraft up in straight and level flight, we'll move into the instrument scan. In all the instrument scans, you'll spend the most time looking at the attitude. That's why it's known as the master instrument. The attitude shows your pitch, your angle of bank, and your slip. Since we're in straight and level flight, we're maintaining a 0° pitch attitude and wings level. The instrument scan is then split into the primary scan and the secondary scan, both of which are centered on the master instrument. For straight and level flight, primary scan includes the altimeter and the heading indicator. The secondary scan includes the airspeed and the slip. You'll go through 3 cycles of the primary scan for every 1 cycle of the secondary scan. This means the scan for straight and level flight starts with the attitude, then move across to the altimeter, back to the attitude, and down to the heading, spending about 3 seconds on each instrument. Attitude, altimeter, attitude, heading, attitude, altimeter, attitude, heading, attitude, altimeter, attitude, heading, attitude, airspeed, attitude, altimeter, attitude, heading, attitude, altimeter, attitude, heading, attitude, altimeter, attitude, heading, attitude, slip, attitude. That's the instrument scan for straight and level flight, so as long as you're maintaining straight and level, you'll just continue cycling through that straight and level instrument scan.
Next, we'll look at the instrument scan for a climb. Before entering a climb, always set the altitude bug first. We're going to climb to 7,000 feet, so we'll set the altitude bug to 7,000. Anytime you make a change while instrument flying, you're going to make a change using the control instruments. So to enter a climb, you're going to first select full power, then pitch 10 degrees nose up, while keeping the aircraft in balance. Hold this new attitude, keep the aircraft stable, and trim. Now that the aircraft is stabilizing in the climb, we'll go into the climb scan. As always, the master instrument is the attitude, and the primary scan for the climb includes the airspeed and the heading. The secondary scan for the climb includes the slip and the altimeter. Start with the attitude, look across at the airspeed, back to the attitude, and down at the heading. Attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading. Attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading. Attitude, slip. Attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading. Attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading. Attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading. Attitude,
Altimeter,
approaching the target altitude, anticipate the level off by about 10% of your rate of climb. So in this case, we'll anticipate by about 50 feet. 50 feet before the target altitude, make a change again using the power and the attitude. First pitch down and give the aircraft some time to accelerate while maintaining level flight. You can see here in this example that the rate of climb was actually 1,000 feet per minute. So 10% of the rate of climb would have been 100 feet, and I should have started the level off 100 feet before the target altitude. Because I didn't anticipate by enough, I've overshot the target altitude by about 50 feet. This is a common mistake from students, particularly in higher performance aircraft. You can avoid this mistake by correctly anticipating the level off. Approaching the target airspeed now, we can reduce the power to a setting that will maintain our cruise speed. The process for flying a descent on full panel is much the same as the climb. Before entering the descent, we'll first set the altitude bug. I'm going to descend to 5,000 feet, so I'll set the altitude bug to 5,000. Entering the descent now, as always, we're going to make the change with the control instruments. So I'll first select a lower power setting. In this case, I'm reducing the power to 50%, and then I'll pitch down to an altitude that I think will give me a sensible rate of descent. In this case, I'll pitch 2.5 degrees nose down, hold this new attitude, let the aircraft stabilize, and trim. Now that the aircraft is stabilizing in the descent, we'll move into the descent scan, which is the same as the scan for the climb. Starting with the attitude, glance across at the airspeed, back to the attitude, and down at the heading. Attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading. Attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading. Attitude, slip. Attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading. Attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading. Attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading. Attitude, altimeter. Approaching the target altitude now, and again we'll anticipate the level off by 10% of the rate of descent. In this case I'm descending at about 500 feet per minute, so I'll anticipate the level off by 50 feet. 50 foot before the altitude, and I'll first reselect the cruise power setting, then pitch to maintain level flight. Again, give the aircraft time to stabilize back in straight and level flight, and trim. The last maneuver we'll look at is a level rate 1 turn. You should always be aware of the angle of bank that you expect will give you a rate 1 turn. To work this out, we take our true airspeed, divide it by 10, and add 7. So in this case, we're cruising at 120 knots. 120 divided by 10 is 12, plus 7 gives us a 19-degree angle of bank for a rate 1 turn. Before entering the turn, we need to set the heading bug to our target heading. Here we'll make a right-hand turn onto a heading of 210 degrees, so I'll set the heading bug to 210. Eyes on the attitude now, and I'll smoothly roll right to an angle of bank of 19 degrees while simultaneously pitching up ever so slightly, only about half a degree to 1 degree to maintain the altitude. Hold this new attitude, and now that the aircraft is stable in the turn, we'll go into the instrument scan for a level rate 1 turn. The primary scan includes the altimeter and the rate of turn indicator, and the secondary scan includes the heading and the slip. So the scan for a level rate 1 turn is attitude, altimeter, attitude, turn rate, attitude, altimeter, attitude, turn rate, attitude, altimeter, attitude, turn rate, attitude, heading. What happens now if we want to combine two of these maneuvers? So let's say ATC give you a heading to turn onto and an altitude to climb to together. For example, ATC say turn right heading 360 degrees and climb to altitude 7,000 feet. Now we need to enter a climbing turn. As always, we'll set the bugs first, so set the altitude bug to 7,000 and set the heading bug to 360 degrees. Entering the climbing turn now. Once again, we'll make the change on the control instruments. I'll first start by selecting full power for the climb and pitching to 10 degrees nose up. Now that I'm at 10 degrees pitch up, I'll roll right to slightly less than 19 degrees because I'm expecting my airspeed to decrease in the climb. Hold the aircraft in this new attitude and trim. Now that the aircraft is stabilizing, we'll go into the scan for a climbing turn. The most critical elements here are going to be the airspeed for the climb and the turn indicator for our rate 1 turn. So the primary scan will be attitude, airspeed, attitude, turn rate, attitude, airspeed, attitude, turn rate, attitude, airspeed, attitude, turn rate, attitude, heading. I can see I'm approaching the target heading, so again I'll anticipate this slightly, eyes on the attitude, and roll wings level, maintaining 10 degrees pitch up to continue the climb. We're now in a straight climb, so we're back into the normal climbing scan. Attitude, heading, attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading, attitude, airspeed, attitude, heading, attitude, airspeed, attitude, altimeter. Once again, I'm approaching the target altitude, so we'll anticipate the level off by 10% of the rate of climb. From what we saw earlier, we know this now needs to be anticipating by about 100 feet. So 100 feet before the target altitude, I'll start the level off. I'll start by pitching down to maintain level flight. Continue pitching to maintain level flight and let the aircraft accelerate. Approaching the target airspeed, and I'll reselect a power setting that will maintain 120 knots. Hold this new attitude, let the aircraft stabilize, and trim.